Okay, so as you can see, I did quite a bit of filing on this. I got the outline that I wanted. Got a lot more work to do down here in the handle area, but now I'm kind of onto the blade. And I started thinking about, what I wanted this knife to do. And basically I want it to be a camping knife. So in order to be a good camping knife, it needs to be strong. It needs to be able to chop wood. It also needs to be able to skin game. So to that end, we have to start thinking about the bevels we're going to put in here. Now there's going to be 3 bevels in here. There's going to be a flat one here on the top, the uppermost part of the blade area, and that's going to give it its strength. But in the center part, the center bevel, the largest bevel, we're going to take a lot of this meat out of here. Now this blade, remember, is 3/16 inch thick. So we couldn't leave it that width, because if you tried to saw through a piece of wood, or you tried to skin some game through it, cut through some meat, anything like that, it's just too fat. It just won't go through. So in order to be a good wood cutter, wood chopper, and a skinner, a lot of that meat's got to come out of the center. So we'll taper this down. We'll start up here thicker, then thinner, thinner, thinner as we come down. The 3rd bevel on the blade will be the cutting edge. Now, problem is, to make all those bevels or those angles work in harmony, it takes trigonometry. But when they were teaching me trigonometry in school, I was paying a little bit too much attention to little Susie that was sitting in front of me, so I didn't quite get it. But I think I got it figured out, so we're just going to go with what I know. Okay, now, if you make a lot of knives, I'd imagine you could just eyeball this, and you could file in, you could clamp this down, make a little jig out of some wood, and file this bevel in without too much trouble, except it's a lot of work. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my belt grinder to put that center bevel in. Problem with that is, how do I hold that angle, across the face of the blade without it deviating? So I thought about that for a while, and what I came up with was I built myself a jig. And this is just a piece of angle iron, and it'll sit up here. I made a surface plate for this grinder because the one that's on here is way too small. But what I can do with this jig is I can clamp the blade to the back side like that, and I drilled 3 5/16 inch holes in here, and I threaded them so that I could take these 3 5/16 inch bolts, and by just screwing them down through the threaded holes, I can raise the angle of the angle iron to whatever angle that I want to put into the blade. And then I should be able to hold that constant angle as I slide this back and forth across the belt grinder. That's the theory anyway, so I'm not sure if it'll work, but I think it will. So let's put the blade on the jig, on the base side of the jig. And what I'm using for that is 1/2 inch bolts. That way I can be sure it won't move. And we'll tighten those down. Make sure we got it sitting on there square. That's good. Okay, got that on there now. It's squared up with the top of the jig, or the bottom actually. And what I did with these is I threaded them so that I could move them up and down to change this angle, but I also put nuts on it that'll act like locking nuts. And if you just run these down and tighten them up, then it'll keep the bolts from turning and that angle will always stay constant. Now, one other issue we've got is we can't take the grind any further than this point right here. And there's going to be a line in there, and there's actually a name, technical name for it, and I can't think of what it is right now. But in order to make sure that I don't grind past that point, I took a little piece of flat iron and I squared it up with my square to make sure it was square, so I'm going to straight. And I'm just going to clamp it on here. Okay. So in theory now, slide across there pretty good, and it does. Now, we just have to figure out the angle of that grind. So, I looked it up, I researched it a little bit, and I see that those angles are kind of all over the place, so I'm just going to kind of go with my own gut feeling here. And I think an angle of anywhere between 10 and 12 degrees would be a good place to start. Right now, let's see, it's sitting at 5, so we'll raise this up. Raise this up, there's 10, 11, 12. Check this other side, and it's 12. Okay. We'll lock these down. Tighten the lock nuts. Okay. Just snug, they don't have to be hogged. Well, I don't know, that looks like a lot. That angle looks too extreme to me. Let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna run out of metal before I get to the other edge. I think I'm gonna lighten up on that. Maybe about half. Well, maybe we'll make it 6 degrees. I guess the hillbilly way of doing this is you just grind off everything that doesn't look like a knife, and then you wind up with a knife. But the problem with metal is, just like a lot of things, you can take metal off, but you can't put metal back on. So it always pays to kind of go conservative, go a little bit at a time, and always you can take off more metal if you have to. So I'm going to lighten this up here. Let's see what 5 degrees looks like. It's barely, well, it's 10. Okay, too much. Go down a little bit more. Okay, we're going to half that, so we'll go 6. Degrees. Yeah, that looks a little better. I'll tell you, I don't know. Maybe that looks like a lot to me. Let's see. Yeah, it might be alright. That might be okay. Okay. tighten this up. Again, snug. Check it. Okay, now to start with, the belt that I have on here now is not a very aggressive one. Got a couple of different grits here. I've got this one that's 40 grit. It's pretty aggressive, but I don't want to start with that one because I just want to kind of see how this is going to work without taking out too much metal. So okay, this should be pretty time consuming. It'll probably take a couple hours. Now remember, I got to do both sides. I'm going to put you know, half the grind on this side, half the grind on the other side of the blade. So this will only be the half of it. So let's crank her up and see how she goes. Now one thing about when you're filing a lot of metal, you know, when you're doing a little filing in a vise or whatever, it's not too big a deal, but you get iron filings in your lungs, they'll react with the fluid in your lungs and they'll rust, and then you got big problems. So whenever you're doing a lot of filing, it's always a good idea to wear a respirator. Just gonna clean that out. Okay. Here we go. Okay, that actually worked pretty well. As you can see, we're starting to get that bevel on there that we want. It's going to take quite a bit more grinding. That actually went a little faster than I thought it was going to go. Now, I actually should make a line down the center here, and I'll probably do that before I do any more grinding, so that I don't go past the center part of this bottom part of the blade, or else the whole thing will be off center. So pretty happy with that. Okay, so I'll go back to work on this, and I'll get back with you when something new to report. Well, it's the next day. I put quite a few hours in on this. You can see I've worked that middle bevel in pretty much where I want it. A little wavy in here. It's really hard getting the angle, you know, exactly right across the face of the blade. Here's how it looks on the other side. Got a little fin down here in the blade, the cutting edge area. but I can cut this edge back a little bit so get to a little bit more meat, so I can dress that up pretty good. But all in all, I think it's looking pretty good. A lot more work to do, but certainly getting there, and I think this was the hardest part. I'm going to have to live with that, I think. I don't know how I'm going to get that out. I just can't. This one came out pretty good. It's not exactly even yet either. I've got a little bit more filing, a little bit more grinding to do on this side. I got to raise this up just a little bit. Maybe when I do that I can get that line out. One problem I did have that I didn't think about was when I made the first jig, you know, the jig that I'm using to grind with, I thought, well, I could just turn this thing around and use the same jig. But that didn't work. So I had to build a mirror image jig, another jig for the other side. And turns out that building mirror image jigs isn't that easy. So there's some slight differences between this jig and that jig, so that's why there's some slight differences in the angle in here and how that line came out. But anyway, just wanted to show you that. One thing I had to be careful of, this line here is called a ricasso. I looked it up. And, you know, bringing the edge in so that it centers up on this part of the tang, on this part of the handle, is kind of difficult, so I just missed it. I almost got it, but it's just a little bit off. But I think it's one of those things that I'll only notice, or a professional knife maker might notice, but your average guy's not going to notice it. I bet every time Leonardo da Vinci walks past the Mona Lisa, he looks at it and he goes, oh, I messed it up right there. Oh, I messed it up right over here. But nobody else notices it, so I guess that's okay. Alright, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this edge up a little bit higher here, this angle, and then dress out the edge, and then clean up around the edges, get all this nice and round in here, smooth these out, and then we'll start making the handle, and we'll go from there.